The second question for Chapter 7 asks to find two findings and explain how they evidence the intersection of race and gender in the U.S. labor market. So the first one would be on page 188. And it's on Rain Dozier's study. She found that both groups, both being black and white groups, experienced wage gains during the 80s and 90s, but white women gained more. She explains that this disparity developed because of white and black women were not equally represented in the job sectors that had the most earnings growth. And then later on down the page, they go on to say how the labor force participation among young college-educated black women was getting higher, but they did not translate into higher average incomes. And alright, that I found was on page 206 when it talks about the work of Adia Harvey Wingfield and Zulima Valdez. They talk about ethnic enclave economy, and it means like just small businesses that just basically serve people of the same ethnicity, and they work for the success of their own people. Later down it says that small business ownership was such a success because of their high human capital, social networks, close-knit ethnic communities. Not only that, but the people who made the study argue that race, class, and gender play a big role in
The
their
third
success.
question tells me to explain why incarceration rates must be taken into account in order to understand labor market inequality. So the first thing I found was on page 194 when they talk about a study from Western and Petit. So they found that without taking the incarcerated population into account, 50% of black high school dropouts aged 22 to 30 had jobs, compared with 80% of white high school dropouts. After factoring the incarceration population, however, this percentage dropped to less than 30% for black male high school dropouts, compared with over 60% for their white counterparts. So I think that later it also talks about how while people are incarcerated, they are either employed or unemployed at extremely low wages, and they usually don't get the minimum wage, obviously. So it also says that the effects of imprisonment endured after incarceration, have trouble with finding jobs and jobs that so the second question tells me to find 3 ways in which racial segregation in the housing market is still a problem. So the first thing I could come up with was how everything in the past has pretty much shaped, or at least the book says it, shaped how we live and how segregated it is. And with the FHA, they created nice housing developments that were pretty much made for whites, and they also created ghettos for people of color. Okay, and it also says that the vast majority of new homes were built in city suburbs where the suburban living was enabled by the simultaneous construction of highways and development of suburban services. Couldn't really find a reason for this, but it just seemed like discrimination or something. But it said that people found that even highly educated black families had less wealth on average than white families, and that gap can also create pretty much that segregation in the housing market. And also with that, the book talked about how like house wealth was a big thing back then, and they would only give it to, at least the good ones, the good loans to white people, and they would give the subprime loans to, okay, here it says that further black homeowners are less likely to build up equity over the years because of residential segregation, and white families are more likely to receive financial assistance in purchasing a home from their family members. So basically the opportunity to get a house and how easy it's going to be, like you're going to have to get a loan so you'll have good credit, everything like that. If you have someone to help you, like a family member, they could co-sign or different things like that. According to the test, if it's okay to state that residential segregation is due to people of color / non-white groups' preferences to live among others with similar experiences. So I don't think that it's okay to say that, because on page 214 it talks about pretty much how segregation began and the 3 factors. The first one would be the racial violence against blacks or people of color, like for example window breaking or cross burning. Second factor would be the creation of a racially restrictive covenants, and that would be agreements that prevent the sale or lease of property within an area to non-whites, keeping everything segregated. And then the last reason would be the nature of federal housing programs and policies, like I said before. Basically stop people from getting good houses, or at least minorities. They would just segregate everyone. And then my second thing why I would say no is that on page 222, the book talks about a study with Maria Crisson and Reynolds Farley. They basically say that, I'll just read it. Contrary to popular perceptions, residential segregation is not due to black Americans' preferences for living exclusively among other black Americans. And then it says, sociologists analyzed survey data from 2,000 black families in several cities and found that they actually would rather have diverse neighborhoods.